Can you hear me? Geppetto's puppet. We need your help.
Good artists borrow, great artists steal is a quote that has circled the creative space for so long it's impossible to guarantee that it was definitely Picasso who said it. But I've always found it to be true nonetheless. Lies of P embodies this concept in its entirety, being so identical to From Software's Souls-like formula in tone, gameplay, and level design that I could see myself being less educated and not knowing it wasn't developed by From, and still thinking it was a From Software game. If you like this style of content and want me to cover more Souls-likes in the future, let me know. Full spoilers ahead for Lies of P and Elden Ring. Lies of P very clearly takes a lot, and I mean a lot, of inspiration from Bloodborne. The combat design is extremely similar with a few differences, the tone of the game is strikingly similar, and even the soundtrack takes a few cues. Many people have said rightly that Lies of P is Pinocchio but Bloodborne. However, there is one thing that I think Lies of P does extremely well, and something I hope From is able to incorporate better in the future, and that's a main campaign with a compelling story. Lies of P doesn't have the greatest narrative known to man, not even the greatest narrative in video games. But the lore combined with the narrative is super satisfying and actually had some meaningful surprises that weren't locked behind lore or extremely obtuse side quests. For example, Melina is set up as your partner in Elden Ring in the main story of the game. Melina gives you the ability to level up, ride your mount, and even guides you to the game's main hub area. However, not only is most of Melina's characterization locked behind specific areas in the main game and completely missable, the little bits of information you do learn about her only end up being interesting from a lore perspective. Even her great sacrifice, which feels as though it's supposed to be a big moment for the game, ends up falling flat because Melina is given such little personality and characterization throughout the game. In contrast, Lies of P has Sophia, who takes the role of the blue fairy in the original Pinocchio book. Sophia is a mysterious being who is the one to awaken the player right at the start. Not only that, but her presence is emphasized throughout the game, as in many cases, the game makes a point to let you know she has some new dialogue for you. Furthermore, a core game mechanic, leveling up, is locked behind speaking to her for a majority of the playthrough, meaning that in order to engage with an important mechanic in the game, you need to learn about her through being forced to at least be exposed to her dialogue. Whether or not the player pays attention is up to them, but this at least makes sure the player doesn't miss opportunities to speak to an important character. Sophia is also behind one of the best reveals in the game. She appears before you near the end and reveals that she wasn't trying to help you save the city, but save her. You climb the villain's tower and find her in an unpleasant state, to say the least. And then you are given one of the most emotionally effective choices in the game. Either kill Sophia or leave her alive to suffer. Throughout the game, the player has been given a lot of choices, most of which involve lying, which actually plays into what ending the player will get, and even whether or not the player will receive a special weapon. Whenever the player lies and makes one of those choices, a message will appear on screen. The first time the message reads, your springs are reacting, and before you make the choice to kill Sophia, the player will likely have read, you feel warmth. In my playthrough, when I chose to kill Sophia and give her peace, that was the first time the message changed to, your heart is pounding. To me, this was the emotional climax of the game. Sophia has always been an ally and never exactly been suspicious, And even though she was lying to us, she was still ultimately a good person. Her positive leaning, moral ambiguity really drives home the message of this game, and while lying might be viewed as a bad thing, all humans still do it for many justifiable reasons. Lies of P also handles its finale much better than Elden Ring, in my opinion. Elden Ring pits the player against Malekith, Gideon, Godfrey, and then Radagon and Elden Beast. While this lineup is fantastic from a spectacle perspective, the actual narrative weight of these fights is varied at best. You can beat Elden Ring in its entirety without speaking to Malekith and Gideon once, while Godfrey and Radagon and Elden Beast are all only portrayed in the lore and other characters speaking about them. Godfrey is arguably the most well done, as he is seen holding his son, Morgott, who we killed previously, before standing to face us. But I have always said that I would have liked Morgott and Godfrey to swap places, because Morgott appears before the player previously as Margit and makes some comments that seem to imply a sort of rivalry with the player. Radagon is arguably the coolest fight in the game, at least visually, and the amount of lore tied to him is super interesting. But the player doesn't have any relationship with him, and even if they spend a lot of time reading that lore, there is no emotional connection there to draw from. Especially after Elden Beast steals the show from Radagon at the last minute. Lies of P's final boss is Geppetto himself, or rather, a nameless puppet Geppetto is controlling. Geppetto wants to use the player's heart to bring his son back to life, and betrays us if we refuse to give up our heart. Throughout the fight, Geppetto is constantly berating Pinocchio for not being a good boy and the like, but ultimately takes the blow to save our heart from being destroyed by his own puppet. While not nearly as emotionally impactful as killing Sophia, Geppetto's betrayal is much more interesting in the main narrative. I will say, Elden Ring's lore is super interesting and incredibly deep. There are entire YouTube careers that have been made on the back of trying to parse Elden Ring's lore and understand the world. As such, the characters are interesting if you take the time to seek them out and learn about them. However, the player feels so incredibly disconnected from all of this, and the small attempts the main campaign makes end up falling flat because everything interesting happened before the player arrived. As I said in my Elden Ring review, this is part of the reason Ranni's questline is so effective. The player is forced to interact with Ranni and her crew at several points, and even if most of the interactions aren't 100% required, the player interacts with Ranni enough throughout the quest to get a sense of the character and form a relationship with her, and makes the alternate ending you can achieve featuring her more satisfying. The fact that most of this content doesn't at least make itself obvious to the player at some point during the main quest is a major disappointment for me, because the quest is so good, but almost requires a guide without thoroughly exploring the map at all times. Ultimately, while lacking in some of that impressive depth that Elden Ring's lore has, Lies of P makes up for it in spades and creates a much more interesting campaign as a result. I've only scratched the surface of the characters who are involved in the narrative of Lies of P, and I highly recommend it if you enjoy a good Soulsborne game. Thanks for watching, remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and have a great day.